Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and in today's video we want to have a look at the brake fan. Why do some Airbuses have them, why do others not have them, what's their use, and what limitations are in place in regards to their use. Now, we're going to start today's video with a little bit of action though. Let's go ahead and release that brakes. We're at almost 81 tons of gross weight over here, and we are going to do a high-speed rejected takeoff today. So that shall serve in order to show you what kind of energy the brakes have to take and why that is so important. Okay, Mantoga SRS runway, auto thrust blue, thrust set. We're going to accelerate all the way up to our V1 of 160 knots, and we are going to initiate the rejection of the takeoff just about there. Okay, 100 knots. Stop. Okay. Spoilers, reverse. 70 knots. Let's bring it to a stop right over here. And here we are. Okay, parking brake set. And now let's have a look at the brake temperatures. You will see that initially they show a pretty low value. And as time passes by, the brake temperature is going to rise increasingly quick and to a rather high temperature. Now, why did I show you this? Basically because high brake temperatures are the point where the brake fans do become interesting. There is a general limitation in the AFCOM that aircraft that are fitted with a brake fan must not take off if the brake temperature indicated is 150 degrees or higher in case the brake fan has been used. This limitation originates from the fact that the brake temperature sensors are located on the outside of the brake disc, but the energy is absorbed on the inside of the brake disc, and therefore the inside heats up a lot quicker than the outside does. And this is what we see over here when the heat now transfers from the inside of the brakes to the outside of the brakes, which is what we can observe right now on our brake temperature indicators. Now, aircraft that do not have a brake fan fitted, or in case you have one fitted but did not use it, your maximum brake temperature is 300 degrees for a takeoff. This limitation exists because of two facts. Number one, the A320 family is fitted with carbon brakes. Carbon brakes become initially more effective as they heat up, but eventually they will reach a point where they will become a lot less effective once they become hotter than a certain temperature. Now, when the brakes are hot and the takeoff is initiated, this temperature limit might be exceeded, and therefore your takeoff might be limited by the maximum brake temperature. And this is the reason why we've got the 300 degree limit. However, when a brake fan is fitted to the aircraft and when the brake fan is used, then this temperature decreases to 150 degrees because of the uneven distribution of the heat throughout the brake disc. You can still see the temperature rising on the outside over here, even though the actual temperature on the inside of the brake disc is going to be much hotter. Likewise, if we have a look at the position of the brake fan, which obviously is on the outside of the brake disc, then you can imagine that turning the brake fan on is going to start cooling the disc from the outside first. And this means that the temperature indicated may no longer match the actual temperature of the brakes on the inside. Now, when the brakes are heating up and exceed a temperature of 300 degrees, and in case of some aircraft, a time of at least 5 minutes from vacating the runway, or rather from landing the aircraft, from the air-ground sensor sensing ground, then you are going to get the brakes hot warning. Now you can see right now 300 degrees is reached, and we get the brakes hot indication on the brake fan push button, and depending on whether the Phoenix has that 5-minute limitation installed or not, we may get the ECAM message any moment as well. Now, there is a second reason for the temperature limitation of 300 degrees for a takeoff, and that is what happens after the takeoff. Now, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Boeing aircraft that do not have a brake fan at all. Now, Boeing philosophy, in case of hot brakes, is just to keep the landing gear extended in flight. However, that can become rather expensive rather quickly. For example, in case of the Boeing 777, an extended landing gear for 10 minutes, which is the time required by Boeing to cool those brakes, would use up approximately 2,000 kilos of extra fuel. In comparison to that, a brake fan, of course, has a certain weight to it, that's 7 kilos per fan, and therefore leads to a higher fuel usage during the flight itself, but it is fairly easy to figure out how many flights you'd have to do with the landing gear extended versus how many flights you'd have to do with the brake fans installed in order to figure out how much value the brake fan actually brings. Now, the reason for the temperature limitation of 300 degrees here is that Airbus follows a different philosophy than Boeing. With Airbus, you will retract that landing gear if the brakes are hot, unless you exceed 300 degrees. This limitation exists because of the possibility of a rupture in the brake fluid lines, and that fluid can ignite from about 426 degrees Celsius onwards. Now, since the temperature sensors are not all that accurate, and since, as I mentioned, the temperature on the outside of the brakes may not equal the temperature on the inside of the brakes, the 300 degree limit is put in place so that it is assured that the inside is no hotter than those aforementioned 426 degrees, and therefore no fire can erupt in case a hot brake is retracted into the main wheel well. Now, as you can see, we are still seeing an increase in the brake temperature over here, so now we should think about, are we going to use the brake fan or not? And first things first, the Flight Crew Technique Manual advises the pilots that delaying the brake fan selection limits the oxidation of any possible transient hotspots of the brake disc surface. The selection of the brake fans before the aircraft reaches the gate prevents to blow carbon brake dust on the ground personnel, and the brake fans blow dust only during the first seconds of operation. Now, there's a lot of information in this sentence from the Flight Crew Technique Manual, but let's start with the basics over here. If you use the brake fan, your brakes are going to oxidize, and that is going to cause increased brake wear and therefore increase the cost. In an optimal case, even if you have a brake fan installed, if the turnaround is long enough, you are just not going to use the brake fan at all. This is going to lead to less wear on your brakes and therefore is going to prevent the operating cost from rising. However, when a temperature of 500 degrees is reached in the brakes, Airbus makes it mandatory to turn the brake fans on if they are installed on the aircraft, since you are approaching the temperature where the fuse plugs in the tires might melt and therefore the tires might deflate. We are rapidly going towards the temperature down here, as you can see, with now 465 degrees on the hottest brake. So chances are we are going to turn on the brake fans in a few moments. If your aircraft is not fitted with brake fans, you can increase the cooling time by releasing the parking brake when the chocks are in place, but in case you have high temperatures like we have right now, if a brake fan is installed, the use becomes mandatory from 500 degrees onwards. Now let's talk a little bit about operational experience then. In the fleet I fly, some aircraft are fitted with a brake fan while others are not. In general, I've never had any problems on the aircraft that were not fitted with a brake fan. Normally, after a typical landing in the A330, the brake temperatures will go to somewhere between 300 and 400 degrees, and that obviously is pretty hot, but the good thing on the A330 is that you have a rather long turnaround time, and therefore the brakes have time to cool down. And with 90-minute turnarounds, which is the minimum specified by Airbus for the type, you are normally not going to have any problems. On the A320 family, however, things look different. As you can see, right now the brake temperature is approaching 500 degrees, and since turnarounds on the A320 family are as short as 30 minutes, in case of one certain airline even 25 minutes, brake temperature definitely becomes an issue, since the brakes have insufficient time available to cool down. In those cases, brake fans are pretty neat tools to help with the cooling. However, remember that if the brake fan is not used, then your brake temperature limit is 300 degrees for takeoff. However, once the brake fans have been turned on, your brake temperature limitation becomes 150 degrees. So that's a limitation that you need to keep in mind. And remember, the reason for that is that the brakes do heat up in the inner part first, and then that heat slowly spreads to the outside where the sensors are located, which is what we are seeing down here. So we're reaching 500 degrees Celsius on our left wheel right now. That's the wheel located over here. So let's go ahead and turn on that brake fan. By the way, did you notice that you can actually see the fan moving down there? Now that's pretty nice, isn't it? So, the temperature already starts to cool. However, in order to demonstrate this, let me just turn the brake fan right back off again, and let's monitor what the brake temperature is going to do. There is a fairly good chance that once the initial cooling effects are over, the temperature is going to start increasing once again. So remember that when you are using your brake fans. Alright, now that we've had a general look at the system, let's go ahead and have a look at a couple of the operational limitations of using such a fan. I'm going to turn that one on over here so that the aircraft starts cooling down a little bit, and so that we don't blow any tires. So let's talk about some general operating limitations and operating considerations of the brake fans then. So the brake fans, as mentioned, should be turned on before entering the gates, but in the best case with at least 5 minutes between the landing run and the activation of the fan, to prevent additional brake wear from occurring due to oxidation. Now, when we enter the gate, or rather before we enter the gate, we want to turn on the fan. The background is that any braking maneuver creates some carbon dust on the brakes, and we want to ensure that that dust blows off before there is any ground staff nearby, because carbon dust can cause cancer. Now, going on from here, once the brake fans are running, we would normally keep them running until the temperature of all brakes is below 150 degrees Celsius. Once the temperature is below 150 degrees, we are going to turn the brake fans back off again. In general, the brake fans work in a way that when the button is in the on position and the air-ground system senses that the aircraft is on the ground, the fans are going to run, but once the aircraft is in the air, they are automatically going to shut off again. Alright, this basically concludes the use of the brake fans in the Airbus A320 family. I hope that you found this video interesting. Let me know in the comments below. Likewise, let me know if the aircraft you're operating has brake fans fitted or not. And with all of that out of the way, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you found this one interesting. Let me know your feedback in the comments below. And with that now discussed, thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe. And if you really love what I'm doing, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.